A woman who was jailed for obtaining abortion tablets to terminate her pregnancy between 32 and 34 weeks is set to be released after the Court of Appeal reduced her sentence. Mum of two, Carla Foster, was originally imprisoned for 28 months last month. Her case led to calls for the decades-old laws to be changed. With me now is Dr. Shona Minson, who's an expert on maternal sentencing at the University of Oxford. Doctor, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Maybe you'll just reprise this story for people who have either forgotten what happened or aren't quite clear on what exactly was the reason that Carla came by those pills that did effectively cause the termination of her pregnancy, and she was able to take them so very late.
So we only know what we know from these original sentencing remarks, and those were a bit limited. But from what we could tell, it was during lockdown. She wasn't able to access normal services. For some reason, things went on a very long time. She had other children, one of whom has special needs, I believe, who she was caring for. And she she sought help, got the abortion pills and was able to take them at a time that is way beyond what is supposed to be allowed.
And just remind us what is supposed to be allowed. Up to what stage of pregnancy is it legal to have a termination?
So I'm not an abortion specialist at all, but up to 24 weeks is legal, although there are exceptions beyond that. But certainly these pills shouldn't have been taken beyond the very early stages of pregnancy.
Right. So you're not, as you say, an abortion expert, but you are a maternal sentencing expert. And some people, I think, might wonder what that means. What is your area of expertise? The sentencing of mothers, is that the idea?
Yes, exactly that. So way back in time, I was a family and criminal barrister, was involved in cases from that perspective, but I've been working as an academic, looking at what happens whenever we send a mother to prison. What is happening to her children? What is the law? What are judges allowed to take into account? What should they be thinking about? How do we look at sentencing as it affects not just one person, but a family and also our whole society?
And is there currently a position in law or in British justice which says somewhere in, you'll tell me where if it does, and you'll also tell me if it doesn't, I'm sure, which says somewhere what we try not to do is send mothers of youngish children to prison. We try to do anything else to avoid their being given a custodial sentence because we understand, obviously, that there's suffering and pain that is reflected on the children in the family. So is that a position in British justice?
Well, there are two things in answer to that. The first is that prison is supposed to be reserved for the most serious and dangerous offences and offenders. So it shouldn't be used for people who are not a danger to society and where the offence is not so serious that only prison is the right punishment. And then there are sentencing guidelines and case law which say that the court should think very carefully about whether when they try to sentence, and they're trying to be proportionate, they're trying to give, you've heard the saying, a punishment that fits the crime or in terms of seriousness. But that if we look at what the impact is going to be on somebody's dependence, it may be that the sentence becomes disproportionate. So it actually does say in the guidelines that if the sentencing is going to cause harm to children, then the court should consider whether a non-custodial sentence would be more appropriate and is possible.
Right. And so does this mean you're not surprised at this development in this case, that Carla is going to be allowed to have a suspended sentence and go home and look after her children?
Yes, it did seem, again, I say I only had limited knowledge of the original case, but it did seem that to send somebody to prison for more than 2 years when they were the primary carer for 3 children, including one with special needs, for this particular offence seemed a very draconian punishment. I'm not surprised that the Court of Appeal have said, yes, we still must punish, and we will say that custodial sentence would have been appropriate, but we will suspend it, which means that she's out of prison, it's still hanging over her, and if she was to commit any further offence within the time period, then she would return and serve the rest of the sentence in prison.
And is this whole case predicated on some ancient laws that do need to be reformed and brought into the modern day or modern way of thinking?
Well, certainly this is, yes, an old statute, but I think that what the judge said was that there wasn't sentencing guidance about this case, but I think that there probably are bigger debates around what we are punishing people for. I think it goes well beyond actually this issue of reproductive rights and abortions, that there are lots of things that we send particularly women to prison for at the moment. A very high number of women go to prison for non-violent offences. Shoplifting is the most common offence that women are convicted of, and we use prison to punish. And actually, we know that prison doesn't rehabilitate, it doesn't stop people from reoffending. In fact, it damages the fabric of their lives and their ability to reintegrate into society. So I think it should stir up some big debates around why we punish and what we think we're achieving through doing it.
I mean, I think it was clear what it was imagined was being achieved in this case, and that was to send, because we know that the prison does one thing, which is obviously confine people, protect us from them, protect them from us, protect them from themselves, etc. But it also, there's this obvious need for justice to be seen to be done. And I think it was clear that this was intended to proclaim to all women everywhere that what had happened was deeply unacceptable, and it couldn't be condoned, and it couldn't be overlooked, and it couldn't be ascribed to any kind of psychological disorder in the mother, and that it was deliberate and calculated and everything else, and therefore prison was the only answer. And because there were such reverberations throughout the land and so many people were appalled and horrified and everything else, the signal was very clearly given. This is what this woman did, don't do it, wasn't it?
Well, I think, yes. I mean, there is that bit of performative sentencing that is saying, don't do this. But we know that really these draconian sentences don't tend to put people off committing particular offences. Now, this woman was clearly in a very difficult position. And I think that, as the court said today, compassion rather than punishment was perhaps what was needed. And so I do think that there is a lack of understanding, particularly when it comes to women. The recent case of Paris Mayo is another example of someone who gave birth at 15, having concealed a pregnancy, has been given a long sentence and told they're to serve at least 12 years for the death of the baby that followed, with no understanding of what might have been going on mentally or physically for that woman. So I think that we know an awful lot now about people, about bodies, about what happens. And I think the courts need to step up with their understanding that just because it says that something is criminal, that should be punished in a very particular way.
All right. Also joining me, thank you very much, Doctor. Also joining me on the programme, Rachael Clarke, Chief of Staff at the British Pregnancy Advisory Service. And I know you know a great deal about this case. Rachael, thank you very much indeed for joining me, partly because the British Pregnancy Advisory Service is the body that did give these pills in the first place, isn't it? So maybe you'll talk us through what actually happened.
Absolutely. I mean, we can tell you what was brought forward in court, and it was agreed at the time that this woman was in incredibly desperate circumstances, that she had spent quite a lot of time looking on the internet about how she might be able to end a pregnancy, which she knew was beyond the legal limit. And she was looking at self-harm, she was looking at buying pills illegally, and she came to BPAS, and she did mislead us as to the gestation that she was in order to obtain the medication. But I think what's really clear is that she was going to end this pregnancy whether or not she had received the pills from us.
Well, she might have tried. I mean, many women throughout history have tried to end pregnancies and not been successful. That's been one of the tragic lots of many, many pregnant women who didn't want to go on to have a baby, but have been unable to end a pregnancy. So when you say it's clear she would have ended it otherwise, that's not necessarily true, is it?
I think what we've seen in terms of patterns over the last 10 or 15 years is that there are the availability of abortion pills which are illegal to obtain for women in England online, and that is quite an available business model for people from overseas who are selling illicit medication, and those medications are effective at ending a pregnancy throughout.
So you think she would have obtained the same sort of pills or pills of a similar ilk by other means? Okay, let me just ask about the sort of contraceptive pyramid, or whatever you'd like to call it. If women are trying to avoid becoming pregnant, obviously men as well, but if women are trying to avoid becoming pregnant, there are contraceptives that you use. Like you can be on the contraceptive pill, you can use a condom, you can use the cap, there are various other things you can use. You can have an injection, you can do various things, can't you? And if you haven't managed to do any of those things, there is the morning after pill too, which you can come by and take the next day to stop the pregnancy. So where do the pills that you sent come into the picture of all of this?
Yeah, so abortion medication, a medical abortion, is the most common way of having an abortion now. Roughly 90% of women end their pregnancy before 10 weeks is up, so in the very, very early stages. And the vast majority of those women use medication. And what that is there's two types of medication. You take one pill and then you wait 24 to 48 hours and you take a second set of pills. And that is an exceptionally safe and effective way of ending a pregnancy, particularly those earlier gestations. Now, it can be used later on in pregnancy, but those have to be used in a clinic or a hospital for the safety of the woman involved.
Right, and so in this very sad case, and I think it's terribly sad, the whole story, desperately sad, what did happen? And then tell us about the court case and the sentencing that was meted out.
Yeah, so our understanding is that once she received the medication, that she took that at home and that an ambulance was subsequently called. And when the ambulance attended, she had passed the pregnancy at home. So there was a baby that was stillborn. The ambulance then, we understand, called the police, and the police then attended her hospital bed in uniform, and they took a statement from her and then went away again. And then she herself called them back and said, you know what, I haven't told you the truth about this. I did take some pills to try and end my pregnancy. And after that ensued 2 years of the police investigating her, calling her back in for interviews with no, real knowledge from her about where that might go. She was then charged last year, and it took about a year for that case to come to court. And then obviously she was sentenced back in June. She ended up pleading guilty to a crime that has been on the statute book since 1861, and that is ending a pregnancy at any gestation outside the provisions of the Abortion Act. So for us, I think it's an incredibly outdated law. And I think what the Court of Appeal has really seen today is that actually these women need to be treated with care and compassion and not, as they said, punishment.
And anyway, the sentencing has been overturned. Now she has a suspended sentence. She can go home. She can look after her children. And I suppose you might be wondering why any of this happened in the first place. Just why this lengthy procedure, why the police at the bedside in uniform, why this sentencing, and just why only now an official record of the absolute vital presence of compassion in any case like this, where a mother's lost a baby. She has said, hasn't she, Kira, that she thinks about the lost baby day in, day out, every single day of her life. She's utterly tortured and tormented. She is not someone who hasn't expressed the most acute remorse for what she did. She's devastated, haunted and hunted by it, isn't she? And she says so.
Absolutely. And I think the really important thing to know is that the women who do this are very, very few and far between. But the women who do are often in exceptionally desperate circumstances. They don't see any other way out. And from our perspective, the solution to that is not to set the police on them and then leave them for 3 years without that care and support they need. And I think it was really obvious from the Court of Appeal today, particularly, that they said she had not had the mental health support, she had not had the care, she'd not had the compassion that she needed to be able to rebuild her life and care for her existing children after this absolutely awful event happened. And, she is the first person to say, and her lawyers have said in court, that she really does recognise that what she did was against the law. But she's also said that she didn't expect it ever to go this far. And I think that that is a real thing that we worry about with women, because I think the vast majority of your viewers are not going to know that abortion actually at its core is illegal, and that you need 2 doctors to approve it, otherwise it's not legal, that not wanting a child is not a legal reason to have an abortion. But the bottom line is that for some women in those very desperate circumstances, when they do take pills that they may have obtained illegally, they are breaking the law.